All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. Karen Lopez. She is a data evangelist with InfoAdvisors. She's also going to be teaching a course at our Modern Data Leaders Summit here in Chicago coming up in April. Very excited to have you on the podcast today. Karen, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this because I love talking about data.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, we're going to get into modern data management. It's going to be the main topic of our conversation today, and the topic of, the course that you're going to be teaching for us. But before we jump into questions, Karen, I'd love if you could maybe share a brief background about, yourself, your career, and how you may have found yourself, teaching these courses with TDWI.
So I was born this way as a data person. I often get that question, like, when did you start working with data? I think I've always been born this way. My mother has a photo of me as a toddler pretending to read the phone book because I loved really structured data. And that's it. So that's sort of the origin story. But I did my first jobs out of school were working for defense consultants, and that was a long time ago. And then I started working with retailers and other governmental agencies, energy companies. And what I found over my career is there's always something new coming over the horizon, yet we still sometimes suffer from the same problems and struggles and challenges that I was working on 35 years ago. So that's kind of how I got to here. And I really think my whole life, my Twitter handle is Data Chick. It's everything about data. Every problem comes down to a data problem is my sort of one of my mantras.
Very interesting. And it is interesting too, because not so many people have that direct path like you. I mean, I've done several of these podcasts and people kind of meander along and then find their way in the data space. But
Yeah.
obviously it was clear cut for you from the beginning, huh?
And sheer luck, I think, too.
Very good, very good. And I also like your comment where we always seem to be, looking ahead into the future, but I think a lot of the problems may still be in the past, as you mentioned, 35 years. The topic of today's podcast is modern data management. So
Mhm.
instead of, changing the topic entirely, we just add modern to it, and I think that maybe gives it a new flair. So so it doesn't sound like we're talking about something from 35 years ago.
I mean, that's a good observation. I will say that, like, I entered the sort of the IT profession because I came up through that side, just as relational databases were just being created, and Tud Cod was writing papers. That's not really a relational database and all that stuff. And, relational databases have been the core of everything up until maybe 10 years ago. And then there was this giant explosion of other types of databases, data stores. And so I do think the tacking on of modern, fairly recently is because, IT is always changing, but the approaches to data management, there's just so many more opportunities now. And, I know, like, people like to say everything's new today. I think things are really, really new now.
Well, that's exciting, and you actually did a great job of leading me to my first question for you. I was going to ask kind of a twofold question here. One, how would you define modern data management? And then two, something you just tried to touch on there a little bit, what has changed within the space?
Yeah. I think when I see modern in front of anything, I want to say it more as a skeptic. Like, don't just rely on things being the right thing because that's always the way you've done it. Although there are certain principles that are still great standards of practice, great standards for, whether a system should be trusted, whether we should have confidence in the data, those sort of things. But it's really hard to tell. It really takes someone with experience, someone who has a lot of free advice that's been paid for, is one of my statements. So, to see that there are modern things that we try, they're exciting, but they don't really take on because maybe they couldn't meet the true test of cost, benefit, and risk. Like, they had benefits, but maybe the cost was too much, or they couldn't scale either person wise or tools wise, any of that stuff. So in 2024, I think a lot of the things I think as modern data architectures and modern data management approaches are things like, do we have new ways of skilling people and organizations? Where should our data be? Should we move compute to the data or data to the compute? when should we be doing things? Like in the 35 years ago, we did data privacy and security things after we had built the databases, and it was sort of retrofitting. And now we know we need to start worrying about those things before we start building stuff,
Mhm.
because it should go in to all the pieces. So, I'm kind of going through the when, where, who, what, and how. The other thing that's really changed over my career is that, unlike many other professions, we kind of let vendors come up with the standards and then we react to them. And, I think we're still an immature enough profession as data people that we need to take on some of that stuff, setting standards. So for me, modern data management is really about how all the W's and the H have changed and how we're going to manage all of those things. We can't just manage one.
Yeah, that's such a keen observation, and I don't know if I've heard that necessarily, said in that way, but it does resonate with me. The vendors tend to lead on this side, where in so many other industries, it's the other way around. So that's very interesting.
Right? Yeah.
Um, so you started to touch on some of this as well, because I do want to ask about the challenges of starting this, modern data management and moving into the modern side of things, if you will, quote unquote, modern. What are you seeing as the biggest challenges that organizations are facing when they try to modernize their data management environment?
That's such a good question. Um, so I think one of the biggest things is that, because we do let vendors come up with, sort of set the de facto standards and then we react to them. I mean, we do participate in standards bodies, but it's a lot more that is sometimes a new modern buzzword that comes out will cause all the vendors to start working on that with different interpretations. Also, their solutions around it tend to be focused on their current products, which is fine. We want to leverage that stuff. But then we're faced with the fact that, unless we are 100% with one vendor lock-in, we now have 5 products that we're using that want to help us classify data as one of the modern things, and inventory data. So how do we get those 5 products? Can we share our already inventory data, our already classified data about whether it's sensitive or PII and all those things? How are we going to get these tools to actually help us do the right thing and maybe only do it once?
Hmm.
That's been my challenge. And part of it is because, like, the big kicker right now, AI, right? I know TDWI just had an AI focused summit event, and like everyone's adding AI. Everyone, literally everyone is adding AI. Well, if each product comes with their own AI parts of it, how are we going to get all those to work together? It's almost like throwing 1,500 more people at the project and trying to figure out how we're going to work together.
Yeah, that's very true. And I agree though. I think a lot of companies, organizations that we're seeing are not just completely locked into one vendor. There's a lot of reasons for that. We've kind of touched on that in previous podcasts, but you know, that is such an interesting thought too. I haven't thought about what that's going to be like when you have 5 different vendors that all have their different versions of this thing, and how do you bridge and marry those things together? That's going to be quite a challenge, I would imagine. Are you seeing anyone being able to overcome that? I know we're super early stages in this, but like, is there any progress in that area?
Well, yeah. So the organizations, the most mature organizations that, have good accountability, good data governance with their data management processes, and they don't have a bunch of, this is really bad, we used to call them cowboy developers, just independent silo workers buying a solution and using it for their project. I mean, certainly that's great in a startup. But if you're enterprise and you already have existing things, you already have data integration tools, you already have data modeling tools, you already have analytical tools, if everyone's going out and buying their own solutions, and I mean methods as well, not just tools, not just software, then it's going to be a lot harder to bring all that work together and leverage it the right way. And we can also come with different understandings. Like, I was on a project recently where everyone was doing their own data inventories and their own data classifications, and they had made different decisions about whether a document had sensitive data or not. So there was no one org or person responsible for sort of rationalizing those different things and coming to a common understanding.
Yeah, and I'm sure, maybe over the course of time there will be some sort of solution that's just like you plug in and all these things will fit and work harmoniously together and there won't be any problems. I mean, is a data mesh something that would work, or data fabric, excuse me, something that might work to do something in that regard?
These are great questions because I will also be talking about data mesh, data fabrics, as well as even something like data vault. They aren't really all the same things, but I think they can really complement each other because data mesh kind of focuses on people and organizations and treating data as an asset, a product of its own, separate from the systems. Data fabric is kind of solving the problem of we have data stored in all kinds of formats in all kinds of places. And it would be really good if people could access that data without having to know or worry about the formats and everything. But this is where it comes back to they should have a good understanding about how this piece of data over here called company and the piece of data over here called company are not exactly the same thing. And that's where a lot of good analysis and data governance and data stewardship comes in. So we have all these things. It's the modern part of these modern approaches is going to be is someone who has a much bigger sort of data solutions architect. I don't know what to call. We're really bad at labels, even though we're data people and we're supposed to specialize in it, to help us understand where the right part of thinking should be stored in relationship, like our definition and our understanding of the data should, it won't always be exactly the same, but it should be highly consistent.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and that leads me to a great question around data governance. You brought it up a couple times. So how does data governance change in this modern data environment then?
Yeah,
Big,
that's a
big
tough.
question. Big
Yeah,
question.
it is. The answer is always it depends, right? But I'm just throwing that out as a joke.
Sure.
So the main thing is, we've got people selling data governance tools that help you solve the problem I'm talking about. So you store this understanding inventory, who are the stewards of the data, what rules do we have, what compliance laws we have to have, how do we make sure that changing outside environmental changes to people and places and things and the law about managing data about them as it changes. But then all these other vendors are starting to put data governance features into their basic database, data store. Even I just got a briefing from a storage vendor who is building data management and data governance into their storage products. And it's all really interesting because now data center and infrastructure vendors actually care about quality of data, safety of data. So that makes me really excited because there used to be just a giant gap
Hmm.
between storing data and knowing what data is there. So I think the data governance part is going to be data governance has become kind of in and trendy and important. And how are we data governance, data management people going to work with all these people trying to give us a solution for those things?
Yeah, data governance, it's a constant topic that we have on this podcast, on our webinars and our conferences, and it just seems to be the breadth of data governance seems to be growing,
Yeah,
every day or every week. So
yeah,
it's definitely more of an exciting part of the industry, I feel like, than maybe ever before.
yeah, yeah. Because who wants to be governed?
Right, right.
Our data to be governed, but nobody wants to be overly, especially if you're very creative type or very
Mhm.
theoretical. It sounds like a bad thing, but I think if you love data, you want the data to be governed.
Totally. And I
Yeah.
mean, and it just, starting with the data quality and all that good stuff, like it really sets the stage for you to be able to accomplish those, bigger projects, those tasks that you want to get down the road and
Yeah.
provide extra value to the organization. So I mean, it makes all the sense in the world to prioritize that and have folks be excited about the ways that AI potentially could help in that aspect as well.
Yeah. I'm super excited about how AI is going to help me, a data management professional, do a better job like that. I'm ready.
I know, and that I mean we can't really avoid AI in any of these conversations at this point. Is there anything specific that you're looking at in the near future that since you mentioned it that you like to bring up?
So I really like the sort of newish stories I'm hearing about generative AI to be able to document, discover, classify, summarize things that we've already done. I do like the sort of natural language parts of AI that allow me to ask, a good person question to data or data resources even, and, be able to say, I was working with some NASA data about meteorite landing. I'm like, what's the nearest meteorite landing near me? And that I don't have to go figure out the source data I'm working with is actual NASA data. So they're storing coordinates in 10 different metrics that I don't really understand.
Mm-hmm.
But a large learning model understood that and was able to look at these poorly named columns and look at the data and figure out which one was nearest to me. Like, I don't want anyone making scientific decisions off that, but if I can ask questions about data, at least it'll get me closer to what I really want to know.
Fantastic. That's such a cool example use case that you shared there. That's amazing. How close was it? Now I'm so curious. Was it very close?
It wasn't too far. It was
Okay.
maybe 500 kilometers from me, but I already knew about that one. I wanted to know it. So this data is really precise. So not just giant craters, but
Sure.
logged meteorite landings.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. So tangent aside, I got one final question for you. We've talked about some of the challenges, but I'm curious, instead of challenges as organizations try to modernize, what mistakes are they making within that process? Not in the startup, but as they're in the middle of the journey, what mistakes are you seeing these organizations making, and
Yeah.
what can they do to overcome those?
I think so. The one that I guess it's near to my heart right now is that for people who were experts in the old ways of doing things, if they're not interested in learning new ways, they can also hold a lot of stuff back. And I live on the interesting edge of, I want to go play with all the new stuff. I want to know how to evaluate where it's going to be useful. Some people aren't there. Some people are, thank goodness, we have these people who are willing to do things, the way that have been successful for 30 years. There are definitely those things there. But sometimes there's skepticism off new approaches like data mesh, data fabric, data vault, kind of carries over to the rest of the project. We saw the same thing. Like, I'm highly a relational database person in my life, but when NoSQL came out, there was just this real antagonistic, relational is going to be dead in a year and NoSQL will fall over, and now we've kind of learned it's a big, every decision is going to come down to some hybrid, because we have different use cases, different workloads, different risk availabilities, different performance needs, different data needs. And so we really need to find people. We need the traditional people to maintain the old IMS systems, and we need new people to help us fit in and evaluate the new approaches of what parts we can adopt that make sense for us right now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me too. You want to have a nice balance of, the old and the new. That clearly would make a lot of sense. I guess maybe the hardest part would be finding those folks, the old and the new. I think that's probably, a tricky task.
Yeah, and it's affordability task, right?
Totally. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, data scientists, like, we're growing more of them now, but 5 years ago, we didn't have enough of them for everybody. The same thing's going to be true for experts who specialize in how to leverage artificial intelligence for better data quality and to reduce costs. Because a regular AI person, there are AI applied to, like, even space fields. That's something I know nothing about. I'll never learn it, but I'm glad they're there, right? I want to help us grow people that help us do data management for cheaper, with less risk, with better results.
Well, there you go. All the younger listeners out there that might be still in school or, just starting out on their journey. There's an interesting field
Yeah.
for you to take a look at if you haven't already figured that out. I'm sure many of you already have, but that's a nice little tidbit there, Karen. Okay, so before I let you go, I know we're running out of time here. I do want to just quickly touch on the class that you're going to be teaching for us in Chicago. It's going to be taking place during our Modern Data Leaders Summit on modernizing data management. I believe you're on the very first day, April
Yeah.
29th. And the course is What Does Modern Data Management Entail? So we kind of gave us a preview, I'm assuming, but is there anything else you'd like to mention about the course?
Um, so I am going to focus on the 5 Ws and cost, benefit, and risk, all of those things. And sort of, I always like to make some predictions. And then I always try in my presentations to leave 10 tips for getting it done better. So that's sort of a plan of mine.
Fantastic. Well, for all those folks out there interested, I will go ahead and put a link in the description of this episode. You'll be able to go directly to the course information. If you're interested, of course, please go ahead and check out the full agenda as well. We have a lot of offerings for both our entire Transform 2024 conference in its entirety, as well as our Modern Data Leader Summit. So please go ahead and click the link. Karen, thank you so much for your time today. It was absolutely a pleasure talking with you. Good luck with your coursework in Chicago in the next couple months,
Yeah.
and with everything else you're doing. It was a real pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks. It's a great chat.